let's talk about Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Technically, the second in the Greentown trilogy, which 1 and 3 are very closely connected with the same central character. 2, this one is not particularly closely connected to the other two, so it's basically a standalone. It was Bradbury's first proper novel, written as a novel. He'd had fix-ups before, Martian Chronicles, Dandelion Wine, and Illustrated Man, that's more explicitly a Fahrenheit 451 as well, which is a expanded novella. Illustrated Man, which is a short story collection. This was his first written as a novel. It wasn't actually written originally as a novel, it was written as a screenplay and then adapted, albeit into actual novel form. So it was, it was not an expansion, it was a full change. Stephen King says on the front, darkly poetic. I mean, he said it in real life, not on the book. Darkly poetic, probably Bradbury's best work. I think it's definitely the most... it has a lot of the most Bradbury things going on that you can imagine in a Bradbury book. And it also is very Stephen King. You can see why Stephen King, of all people, would like it. No criticism. That's not an implicit criticism. I like Stephen King on the whole. I don't think it's the best Bradbury book I've read, of the 4 I've read, and with another 1 or 2 to come this year. Well, I think one's a reread, so 1 fresh this year. But it is very good. It's very strong in lots of ways. I think there are a few signal limitations that pull it down from being, well, put it this way, as good as you sometimes hear from people. I think there's an interest. Basically, it's about 2 boys. Are they 12 or 13? They're about to enter manhood. They're about to enter their teens full on or whatever. And the circus comes to town, and one of them is really tempted by the strange, dark aspects of the circus, and the other, Will, is not. So Jim is, Will is not. And Will's dad is pulled into, he's quite old for a dad. I think, he's 39, 40 when his son was born, his first son and only son. He feels prematurely old. Jim feels too young. Will sort of feels, Will's actually pretty solid, but they are wrapped up in this strange travelling circus, which is pretty clearly, very quickly, apparently demonic. It's evil. There's something very bad going on in it. It does bad things to people. In that sense, you can see the Stephen King influence pretty clearly. And there is regularly a very effective ratcheting of tension and of weird, creepy stuff. It's quite strong as not so much a straight horror book. There are a couple of actually very tense and strange chapters, but atmospherically, as a horror book, if you see the distinction, it's not constantly plotted very, very so tightly that you're wound up, but there are moments it is. But it just atmospherically is creepy and unpleasant quite a lot of the time. In that kind of pleasant chill. The idea, Burke's idea of the sublime, the escape from danger, the fact that you're not in danger as you read it. There's a lot of that. And I appreciated that. I think the main characters, the bad guys, Mr. Dark and Mr. Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show, Will and Jim, and Charles Holloway, Will's dad, the library janitor who loves books, are all excellent characters, and it is a really interesting dynamic that this isn't just as a coming-of-age book, a timeless rite of passage book, Washington Post book world. It's not just about these kids who, in a non-adult world, have to become adults. But in the non-adult world, I mean, as in there's a world where suddenly adults are absent. A classic of that would be Stand By Me, Stephen King's The Body, where adults are absent and there is a quest. The Goonies is another one. This is a little bit more like, and it's in genre too, The Lost Boys, the film The Lost Boys, in that there is a way in which adults and kids are both having to deal with some of the same problems. And I think that's effective. I think it's an underrated thing. It's very natural that we envision and use the horror genre for the coming of age time. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is all about growing up, but there are other things too that can be addressed by the same genre, and I think this cleverly does that. And I think there's a parallel there actually to King's Dark Tower, which involves rite of passage, romance, old man, trials, things like that. So the characters are great. Charles Holloway has some just fantastic scenes of dealing with his own angst, attempting to resolve it. Will is just a good egg, and Cougar and Dark, well, Dark particularly, who is the main antagonist we see, is profoundly disturbing and evil. Interestingly, he is the illustrated man, much the same sort of thing as in the short stories, and inspired by, though I think it's actually, Mr. Electrico is inspired by, is the inspiration for Cougar, and Mr. Electrico was, as Bradbury calls him, a Christian mystic who he met in the 20s, I guess. But Dark is also inspired by this childhood experience of a nice circus, but which nonetheless Bradbury always had kind of, there eerie memories of. But Dark is a terrifying villain at points, and a satanic villain. So yes, it's very effective on the whole. It's very enjoyable. There is, Asthma Experiences, even though this is a dedicated novel, written as a novel, Bradbury doesn't really write plots in a comprehensible fashion. I don't mean he is a Abercrombie, there's a book where nothing happens kind of thing. What I mean is there's often not a strong sense in this book, as with the fix-ups and expansions and stuff, of a plot that is advancing and which has clear beats. There are occasionally clear beats you can see, this is this thing in the story, but there's much less in the sense of, what we talk about in terms of pacing. One of the things we mean by pacing is the ratcheting sense of tension up to catharsis, the rising action. And this gets there in the back third. There's much more rising action in the back third. Now, I mean, this is 270 pages long, so 90 pages. But for 2/3 or so, it's not so much meandering. I wouldn't even say it's slow paced. That's not really the criticism. It's more that it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen next in terms of the movement of the music. And it's okay to subvert an expectation, but there has to be an expectation there. And Bradbury is never strong on that, and that's not strong here. The other thing, and this was pointed out a bit in our discussion on Discord, is that, and this, I think some people will struggle with this more than others. I think there were 6 of us read this, perhaps, I think. And one of the group particularly, and I agreed, and I think we all agreed to a degree, pointed out that Bradbury's constant writing for effect, constant push for purple prose, does lead actually to some absolutely remarkable imagery, and he's always very good at that. Here, though, I think compared to the most recent 2 of his books I've read, which is Dandelion Wine and particularly to Martian Chronicles, it struggles at points in being forced. The sense that there is a slightly overpushed image or a metaphor that doesn't quite work. And there's a point here that, you think about Eliot talking about dead metaphors, the idea there is a constant renewing of the language, the purification of the dialect of the tribe. And I guess you could say, well, Bradbury is trying to do that and he doesn't always succeed, so let's not blame him. And I agree. But what it does mean is occasionally you feel you're slightly stuck in an attempt from him to make this otherworldly situation seem otherworldly. And it just doesn't quite work, basically. You end up being like, oh, okay, and I think those 2 things are enough to, they knock a star or a star and a quarter off, as something like that. I think it's a good book. It's a very fun book. It atmospherically is a very strong book, and if you're really into that, I think you'll enjoy this. And same with if you're into weird circuses or whatever. I think it's a good coming of age story and a good dealing with age, in Charles's case, story. I think there are limitations which mean it's not going to be one of my all-time favourites, but I was glad I read it. If you have read it, tell me what you thought about it in the comments. Tell me your favourite Bradbury books. Till next time.